The route is being calculated. Now turn half right. Now turn right. Now keep to the left.
好啦，各位，又到呢個星期五晚，今晚咧就係呢個超級咖喱飯啦。
Benny 咖喱飯。
咁咧就我諗起嗰個見到請大耀廷上嚟咧，就我哋記唔記得6年前
係
你同我喺呢個中環啊，就某間 coffee shop 嗰度，
係啊，
就討論呢個佔中。係啦，嗰陣時我諗你寫完喺信報嗰篇文章。
Now turn right.
係啊
，Please keep to the left in 50 yards onto A5204, then turn left. Now turn left.
你應該再近啲就我未開始提出風雲嘅時候，特登揾咗你喺天后嗰度食早餐傾㗎啦，你記唔記得
？Now turn right.
就戴耀廷又好犀利，我覺得我有一次睇馮希乾寫嚟，咁佢就話戴耀廷就好似呢個劉鎮偉嘅《西遊記》裏邊嘅戴益嘅。
Now turn half left.
死唔斷氣。
係冇錯，呢個我強項，死唔斷氣。
咁咧就今日揾Benny 上嚟咧，就都係死唔斷氣㗎啦。係啊。咁就你離開咗港大之後咧，咁大家好多人都好即係戥你抱不平啦咁樣。咁但係我覺得我上個禮拜我都同Gary 講我話，即係我都好 respect戴耀廷係即係每一次當係即係面對挫折嗰陣時，面對好多變化嗰陣時，又會再重新諗一啲新嘢出嚟。係。又再嚟過咁樣。我想問下你呢個拉薩路計劃，你可以簡單講一講俾我哋啲聽眾聽，係一門乜嘢事先？
嗱，即係如果有讀過聖經咧，就會知道咧喺聖經裏邊有個古仔咧就講。
Now turn right.
就係耶穌一個朋友嚟嘅，咁佢就病咗，咁佢就最後佢就死啦。咁但係喺耶穌係會去準備去救佢，不過耶穌特登咧遲咗嗰2日先去救佢。咁去到嘅時候咧，拉撒路已經死咗啦，喺個墳墓度已經4日㗎啦。4日。
Now turn left.
嗱，講埋故仔先，因為耶穌係特登遲到嘅。耶穌唔係話係即係塞車咁遲到啊！佢特登喺度等2日，因為有人即係拉撒路嗰2個姐姐就特登叫人去叫耶穌，喂，快啲嚟啦！你哋咧。
Please turn right in 300 yards onto Devonshire Street, then turn left.
到時候咧就拉撒路死咗，咁佢就去到，咁啲姐姐都怨拉撒路耶穌話點解唔早啲嚟啊？你早嚟佢唔使死喎咁樣，但係耶穌就係要彰顯到嗰個神嘅榮耀嘅咁樣，咁跟住就叫拉撒路就出嚟啦咁樣。嗱，呢個就係嗰個聖經嘅古仔啦。嗱，點解會促使我即係要去用呢個拉撒路做一個計劃名啦？就嗱，呢個都同我前一排即係講香港法治已死嗰個講法，即係一路大家爭議咪香港法治已死啊嘛。咁但係好清楚啦，香港法治死，警察濫權完全不受制衡，仲唔死咩咁樣嚇？咁又壞只有最壞。嗱，我自己嘅經歷就去到喺大學裏邊大學冇咗學術自由，咁大學仲唔死係咪？咁大學都已死啦。咁你一啲成個社會裏邊咁重要嘅
，Now turn right，
香港咪死啦係咪？你財富雜誌喺1995年講話預言香港已死，咁冇即刻死。
Now turn left。
我哋可以好清楚，可以幫佢 certify 㗎啦。經咗23年之後，佢死㗎啦，佢死咗。 咁但係即係我呢種人咧就係一就係死唔斷氣，就係即係拉撒路咁樣，即係死咗我都仲喺個墳墓度喺度等緊有冇人嚟救我，我相信有人嚟救我，相信有機會復活。咁我而家成日都講香港而家咧就好似喺個墳墓中嘅拉撒路喺墳墓中嘅4人。嗱，佢應該係好相信到耶穌會嚟救佢，但係其實佢唔知點樣救佢嘅，即係喺個墳墓裏邊，我哋都唔知道耶穌會點樣救到我哋嚇。但係咧，我哋就會知道就係我哋會有復活嘅一天。咁而家我哋就喺墳墓裏邊嗰4日，就喺啲黑暗當中，就係而家香港嘅現狀就係我哋黑暗當中。咁墓中4天如何過咧？就係拉撒路計劃嘅嗰個所謂精髓所在啦。我哋未必要可以做啲好實質嘅嘢去令到我哋復活嚇，因為能唔能夠令我哋復活咧？我自己睇就都係個大局，都係睇國際形勢對中共嘅壓力㗎啦。我哋喺香港做嘅嘢咧，其實係為咗令到我哋復活之後，我哋點樣走，或者可能再簡單啲就係你喺墓中裏邊，其實都冇嘢好做㗎啦。咁不如就去，即係你其實冇嘢好做喎，咁你不如就做一啲嘢，諗一啲嘢。就係等你可以捱得過呢4日，黑暗嘅4日係長㗎，因為你想象下，你喺呢個黑暗裏邊係冇光乜都冇嘅時候，其實你唔知時間嘅，你唔知係原來4日，你可能以為係4年，甚至以為40年咁長嘅，但係都係4日啫，不過4日都唔短嘅，耶穌都係3日復活啫嘛，拉撒路都要4日先復活，即係我哋可以預見個時間咧係有嘅，要捱嘅，咁點樣捱過佢咧？咁樣，咁我就話，既然係咁，不如我哋就想像未來啦。嗱，而家講現在嘅嘢點樣去改變而家嘅制度，推翻乜嘢唔講得咁啊！而家國安法，咁我哋就我乜嘢都唔掂，我淨係去諗就係我哋想香港嘅未來係點樣？假設我哋有一個民主香港，我唔知點樣嚟啊！我而家唔講呢樣嘢啦嚇。但係如果我哋有個民主香港，咁我哋想要個香港係點咧？咁樣不過咧，你要講到呢一步咧，可能大家要坐埋一齊傾咧，就要先咧就要去處理咗個死因先，即係嗱，拉撒路就病咗先死啊嘛。咁咩嘢導致拉撒路病咧？個病點解會導致佢死咧？嗱，咁呢樣嘢，我哋如果要重生之後，都希望唔好再翻去舊嗰個病啊。咁你起碼你要解決咗嗰個病係咩先啦，然後我哋想像嘅未來先至唔會再次跌翻去舊嗰個嘅所謂嘅死因嗰度噶嘛。咁所以呢個可能首先一個過程，我一路講就係一個全港性嘅一個嘅商討嘅過程，其實就參考咧就8年前新加坡政府嗱由政府主導嘅嚇嗰個，但係我哋就民間主導嘅，就新加坡政府就主導一個好似叫 Singaporean Conversation 咁嘅嘢，就其實就係佢就係想為新加坡人諗下未來係點樣樣，咁佢由政府主導4萬人參與個商討喺個過程裏邊，咁我哋就唔知有冇4萬啦嚇，我哋話4000幾千人都已經好犀利㗎啦。咁但係如果做到4萬仲犀利添啦嚇。咁我哋民間去做，我哋就一齊坐低，可能先去為到哀悼咗死亡添。其實我諗好多人經歷過反送中咧，或者由雨傘開始啊，一路去到而家，其實咧心靈裏邊其實都仲有好多哀痛喺度嘅。可能要先經歷一啲處理啲情緒先，然後咧有情緒，然後咧就去到就係去剖析嗰個死因，就係一啲嘅分析嘅嘢啦。但係亦都可能我哋需要做一啲就係一啲掌握翻我哋嘅核心價值，因為我哋想去想像，即係 imagination 呢樣嘢咧就唔係憑空嘅，你一定要建基喺處理咗情感，處理咗一啲理性嘅思考，亦都要有一啲嘅價值。我哋要確定翻我哋想要香港嘅核心價值係咩嘢。可能而家有啲人會質疑翻晒好多樣嘢，但係我哋呢個過程，然後我哋就進入到嗰個 imagination 嘅部分，就係而又唔係講得咁抽空嘅。我哋其實想係，我希望嘅就係我哋翻到去每一個人自己嘅細嘅社。
Please turn left in half a mile, then keep to the right.
或者有啲人可能係醫護嘅，或者老師嘅，佢哋自己喺自己嘅社群度，從佢哋自己最貼近嗰樣嘢出發，即係頭先講嘅嗰啲都可以做啦。但係嗰個想像就係想像一啲佢最容易想像到嘅嘢，就係我想我嘅社區係變成點樣，我想個醫療，我喺醫療嘅制度裏邊，咁我想嘅工作會係點樣做法，點樣先係得咧？教育嘅，咁各個人由佢自己嗰個社群出發，然後慢慢嘅4萬人能夠散開去，咪砌起到一幅全港性嘅 我哋嘅對香港未來嘅一幅圖畫咯。咁呢個就係暫時我都仲係好抽象去講緊，因為其實我啲計劃咧開頭一投遞出嚟咧，其實我都唔知係要做乜嘅。好多時候咧就好似咁樣啦，同你傾下就得㗎啦。
你諗到嗰啲嘢咧都好大鑊嘅。嗱個概念一開始嗰陣時又冇乜嘢嘅。係啊，冇乜嘢。即係每一次雷動好、風雲好、初選好，到呢個嘅以前嘅雨傘運動好、佔中商討日好，乜都好啦。我覺得總之咧，一定咧有得戴耀廷咧加持嘅話咧，就一定係大鑊啦。我就幫你諗咗個英文名嘅。係啊，係咩？叫咩？叫做 OMBD。OMBD 係即係點啊？唔係 Over My Dead Body， 係 Open My Dead Body。Open 啊，復活啦 ！Open My Dead Body。因為你要首先就係話，嗱，你頭先講咗3個階段啦。第一個階段就係情緒治療，我覺得呢個好重要。因為香港人咧，你見到721好、831好，越嚟越大嘅不公義咧，係1年之後再出現。咁我相信咧係需要一種即係大家安撫自己嘅憤怒，我覺得唔係淨係哀傷添。啱。嗰個憤怒係好緊要嘅，其實。咁啊，共聚埋一齊，我覺得。仲有一樣情緒就係恐懼，仲有恐懼呢個情緒啊。其實喺國安法之後，恐懼嘅情緒好大㗎。同埋宿命啊。係啊。憤怒、恐懼，然後跟住宿命。咁我覺得第二個重要係咩咧？就係拉撒路係一個復活嘅信念喺度。係啊，冇錯。佢唔係話死咗算波點就算㗎啦。係。佢死，佢相信，只不過耶穌遲到啫嘛。其實係嘛？你知其實搞社運嘅人通常都遲到㗎啦。我哋好單。喂，嗱，基督徒聽到可能麻麻地啊！你咁樣講耶穌。不過聖經係套用喺香港嘅社運朋友身上面。阿 Gary， 你記唔記得阿華叔之前成日都鬧我哋㗎？係啊。約我哋7點鐘企街站，華叔6點9已經到㗎啦。我哋7點鐘準時到，佢又話我哋遲到。因為華叔永遠都早到。華叔永遠都早到3個字嘅。咁所以咧就復活嘅信念即係咩咧？就係我哋相信，雖然香港我哋熱愛嘅香港已經死咗。但係我哋相信我哋有力量，係啊！大家嘅信念集結埋一齊，係可以改變呢樣嘢。咁我覺得拉撒路係因為佢有個信心喺度。係冇錯啊！咁我哋唔可以靠外力咁簡單嘅，所以當然個國際大環境啊、個政治環境好重要啦。我覺得，但係你自己都準備唔好嗰陣時，啱啊，係嘛？咁你臨死拉撒路之前係咁拍丸啊、飲酒啊咁樣，結果死咗之後復活唔到咁點咧？係咪？即係成個身體都爛晒，冇得救。可唔可以理解？可唔可以理解為嚇？當你講話即係死唔斷氣，其實就係透過商討，透過一啲實務嘅事工嘅工作，係去維持住嗰個文氣。即係等待復活嘅過程係一個好黑暗漫長嘅過程裏邊咧，係即係都唔會死晒咁。係啊，因為其實而家咧，我諗我哋喺個依個階段咧，就有啲似咧，就係15年之後到19年之間嗰4年。你大家記得啊，15到19之間咧，真係社運低潮嚟㗎。但係而家其實我哋嘅狀態比嗰陣時係好好多，因為而家即係一個覺醒嘅人多。係啦。只係客觀上邊，因為個疫情嘅原因，大家唔出嚟啫嘛。係。但係你嗰個心係未死嘅。喺15到19嗰段中間嘅時候，我最記得我同陳建文邵家臻黃浩銘，我哋入監嘅時候，嗰個時候我覺得就真係最低點。
Please turn left in 300 yards onto A400, then keep to the right.
嗰個係最低點嘅時間，但係就跟住之後一路變化，到而家咧，我覺得雖然好似係靜咗，因為我最近睇就係波蘭嗰個嘅有本書係講關於波蘭嗰個嘅改變嘅歷程嘅，即係嗰個佢哋民主化歷程。個作者一路研究成個波蘭轉變歷程咧，佢提出一點，我覺得好啟發我就話，最大嘅挑戰喺邊度咧？最大嘅挑戰就係喺好似係靜默嘅嗰段時間。佢講嘅就係當年嘅波蘭團結工會其實起咗之後，跟住中間發生好多事，然
Ukraine to put political pressure on the country. And the danger here is that actually Germany becomes involved in this political instrumentalization of gas export by Russia and the Russian state.
The United States imposed sanctions almost a year ago on companies that were involved in Nord Stream 2. Has that had an impact on the construction of the project?
It had quite a huge impact. The pipeline was nearly completed by the end of last year, and then the US implemented sanctions which were targeting the companies that are laying the pipes through the Baltic Sea, which lead this company to exit.
Now turn left.
Currently, the pipeline is not completed, despite there are only about 100 kilometers.
Now keep to the right.
That still needs to be laid. The Russians currently equip Russian ships, so they're going to be able to lay the pipes, but so far they haven't re-equipped these ships, and there are possibly upcoming new US sanctions which could further stop or at least prolong the completion of Nord Stream 2.
Given some of the political pressure there is inside and from outside Germany over the poisoning of the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, do you think that Nord Stream 2 will ever be completed?
I don't think that the German government will withdraw the support from Nord Stream 2 because first, it's nearly completed, and second, not only Gazprom invested massively in the project, but also two German companies by far more than €1 billion. So that would be a huge blow and loss for the German economy, and would also probably undermine the trust of German companies in the government. So the German government is kind of in a deadlock. Still, there is, after the Navalny case, not only pressure internationally from other European countries and the US, but also effectively from opposition parties in Germany to stop Nord Stream 2. The German government actually has several options at hand, and that is not only stopping Nord Stream 2, they could also opt for other sanctions. For example, on the European level, within the sanction regime against or for the prohibition of chemical weapons, they could also implement national sanctions like expelling diplomats. That has happened also after the assassination of a Georgian citizen last year in Berlin. So I think the German government will opt for those options to, on one hand, show that they're capable of action and that they do not accept such Russian actions in the case of Navalny, but on the other hand, avoid to stop Nord Stream 2.
Sarah Pagogner in Berlin. Well, Nord Stream 2 has long divided European Union member states. Some countries worry the pipeline will undermine Ukraine, which benefits financially from Russian gas pipelines that crisscross the country. Andrius Kubilius is a Conservative Lithuanian member of the European Parliament and is the Chamber's standing rapporteur on Russia. He was also the Prime Minister of Lithuania twice.
Please follow the road for 4.6 miles.
The German government asking for Nord Stream 2 to be abandoned.
Absolutely. I signed some of initiative letter from some members of European Parliament that it should be done. We appeal to the German government really to abandon this project, which from the very beginning we were opposing.
Road blocked ahead on A10 between North Tottenham, London, A1010, and High Road, Tottenham, London, A503.
講性嘅我哋嘅對香港未來嘅一幅圖畫咯。咁呢個就係暫時我都仲係好。
Route recalculation.
其實我啲計劃咧開頭一提出嚟咧，其實我都
Please follow the road for 1.7 miles.
傾下就得㗎啦。
你諗到嗰啲嘢咧都好大鑊嘅。人個概念一開始嗰陣時又冇乜嘢嘅。
係啊，冇乜嘢。
即係每一次雷動好、風雲好、初選好，到呢個嘅以前嘅雨傘運動好、佔中商討日好，乜都好啦。我覺得總之咧，一定咧有得戴耀廷咧加持嘅話咧，就一定係大鑊啦。我就幫你諗咗個英文名嘅。
係啊，係咩？叫咩？
叫做 OMDD。
OMDD 係即係點啊？
唔係
乜嘢
open my dead body，
係
係 open my dead body。
open 啱復活啦 ，open my dead body。
因為你要首先就係話嗱，你頭先講咗3個階段啦。第一個階段就係情緒治療，我覺得呢個好重要。因為香港人咧，你見到721好、831好，越嚟越大嘅不公義咧，係1年之後再出現。咁我相信咧係需要一種即係大家安撫自己嘅憤怒，我覺得唔係淨係哀傷添。啱。嗰個憤怒係好緊要嘅，其實。咁啊，共聚埋一齊，我覺得。
仲有一樣情緒就係恐懼，仲有恐懼呢個情緒啊。其實喺國安法之後，恐懼嘅情緒好大嘅。
同埋宿命啊。係啊。憤怒、恐懼，然後跟住宿命。咁我覺得第二個重要係咩咧？就係拉撒路係一個復活嘅信念喺度。係啊，冇錯。佢唔係話死咗算波點就算㗎啦。佢死，佢相信，只不過耶穌遲到啫嘛。其實係嘛？你知其實搞社運嘅人通常都遲到㗎啦。我哋好單。
喂，嗱，基督徒聽到可能麻麻地啊！你咁樣講耶穌。不過聖經係套用喺香港嘅社運朋友身上面。
阿 Gary， 你記唔記得阿華叔之前成日都鬧我哋嘅？約我哋7點鐘企街站，華叔6點9已經到㗎啦。我哋7點鐘準時到，佢又話我哋遲到啊。
因為華叔永遠都早到。
華叔永遠都早到3個字嘅，其實。咁所以咧就復活嘅信念即係咩咧？就係我哋相信，雖然香港我哋熱愛嘅香港已經死咗。但係我哋相信我哋有力量，係啊！大家嘅信念集結埋一齊，係可以改變呢樣嘢。咁我覺得拉撒路係因為佢有個信心喺度。係冇錯啊！咁我哋唔可以靠外力咁簡單。所以當然個國際大環境啊、個政治環境好重要啦。但係你自己都準備唔好嗰陣時，啱啊，係嘛？咁你臨死拉撒路之前係咁黑丸啊、飲酒啊咁樣，結果死咗之後。復活唔到咁點咧？係咪？
即係成個身體都爛晒，冇得救。可唔可以理解為嚇？當你講話即係死唔斷氣，其實就係透過商討、透過一啲實務嘅事工嘅工作，係去維持住嗰個文氣。即係等待復活嘅過程係一個好黑暗漫長嘅過程裏邊咧，係即係都唔會死晒咁。係啊，因為其實而家咧，我諗我哋喺個依個階段咧，就有啲似咧，就係。15年之後到19年之間嗰4年，你大家記得15到19之間咧，真係社運低潮嚟嘅。但係而家其實我哋嘅狀態比嗰陣時係好多，因為而家即係一個係啦，只係客觀上邊，因為個疫情嘅原因，大家唔出嚟啫嘛。但係你嗰個心係未死嘅。喺15到19嗰段中間嘅時候，我最記得我同陳建文邵家臻黃浩銘，我哋入監嘅時候，嗰個時候我覺得就真係最低點，真係到最低點。但係我哋係啊，亦都係彈到跟住就上翻嚟啦。我覺得係就係嗰個係最低點嘅時間，但係就跟住之後一路變化，到而家咧，我覺得雖然好似係靜咗，因為我最近睇就係波蘭嗰個嘅有本書係講關於波蘭嗰個嘅改變嘅歷程嘅，即係嗰個佢哋民主化歷程。個作者一路研究成個波蘭轉變歷程，佢提出一點，我覺得好啟發我就話，最大嘅挑戰喺邊度咧？最大嘅挑戰就係喺好似係靜默嘅嗰段時間。佢講到就係當年嘅波蘭團結工會其實起咗之後，跟住中間發生好多事，然後到之後，到89之後先至可以突破到啊！中間點樣捱過到嗰個靜默期，好似咩都冇咁樣嘅情況咧？其實就係波蘭團結工會喺當中做咗好多嗰種嘅聯網嗰種嘅 networking 啊，嗰種嘅工作咧，依個咧係好關鍵嘅，對於最後能夠突破到。嗱，而家我哋就係好似係冇嘢好做。嗱，已經講笑啫，即係話既然都冇嘢好做，做緊啲嘢嚟做，唔係嘅，而係嗰樣嘢就係我哋需要就係建立翻嗰個網絡。而初選，我覺得產生到嗰個效力，點解連原本應該禮拜日有得投票嘅都見到冇得投票咧？即係初選嗰個威力就係因為我哋建立起咗一個即係民主派裏邊咧跨黨派、跨路線嘅一個網絡積咗上去。不過即係話可能最近因為一啲 去留嘅問題，令到嗰個網絡咧好似有啲鬆咗啲位，甚至可能講有啲裂痕添咁樣。但係我又唔覺得係致命性嘅。我諗我哋可以用方法去救得翻嘅。咁而家問題就係點樣去重新去建立翻個網絡。不過喺國安法之下咧，我哋要做得好有技巧地去做。即係我就一路唔贊成咧就送頭嘅。即係我哋喺呢個時候冇理由消耗我哋自己嘅。我自己一定唔會送頭，我老婆都唔會俾我送頭啊！即係我哋一定要做一啲嘢，有智慧啲、聰明啲。佢真係要踩埋嚟，我哋都冇辦法阻止佢。但係起碼我唔會俾個藉口你。所以我而家特登係用拉撒路呢個名嘅。拉撒路係聖經古仔嚟，我而家講到喂講聖經都唔得啊！而家係咪？即係我哋但係大陸就唔可以有宗教自由啫。咁香港都仲可以講下聖經啩咁樣咯。
係有冇諗過啦？阿 Gary 或者阿 Benny 可以有冇諗過咧？如果而家一個國安體制下面嘅香港咧，即係我哋唔係淨係一個墳墓咁簡單。嗰個墳墓黑掹掹之餘咧，四圍上邊仲有蝙蝠，地下有老鼠，然後有四腳蛇，有蛇形。
Please turn left in half a mile.
咁你諗下黑掹掹，你又感覺到啲蝙蝠飛嚟飛去。跟住又聽到啲老鼠叫，其實好大鑊喎！你眯埋眼諗下，你都知道。咁你個 body 就死咗喎，但係佢嗰個人嘅即係個意識仲喺度喎，咁樣。
係冇變。
咁點樣可以？我自己第一個疑問就係點樣令到嗰種恐懼？譬如會唔會用各種嘅理由又拘捕嗰啲嚟參加賭商啊，或者係用好多方式政治上嘅手段去打壓呢樣嘢？而打散你嗰個嘅意志，打散你嘅信念咁樣，即係有乜嘢方法可以我哋即係除咗你話改個名之外，咁你知啦，其實有啲警察連拉撒路係邊個都唔知，仲話你勾結外國勢力添啦，肯定。
因為拉撒路西方人名喎，咁樣係。唔係我有喺網上。拉撒路啊，
仲唔係意大利國家隊教練，係嘛？
網上
你嘅水平係咁上下嘅喎。
網上有個人幫我改咗個名叫拉細人喎，係
啊，即係仲唔係呢個國安法裏邊嘅呢個勾結外國勢力咁樣喎？佢哋嘅水平係咁點樣？即係我覺得係咪應該我哋喺陽光下邊，即係更加依靠公民社會裏邊現存嘅一啲嘅已經標籤咗，即係有嘅一啲嘅有體制喺度咧。
但係呢個就 Gary 啱可以講多少少嘅，即係譬如話喺社區裏邊嗰個可行性得唔得嘅就係啦。我哋如果係透過，因為我哋有389個民主派區議員，嗱我哋喺個地區裏邊，喂開街坊會啫嘛，街坊坐埋一齊，大家傾下究竟我哋想個社區，我哋唔係講到乜嘢喎，我淨係講我們想要的社區。最理想嘅社區係一個咩嘅社區？咁啊，大家坐埋一齊。當然坐埋一齊就首先就係我哋嗰個香港已死咁樣就做翻晒嗰啲嘢先啦。咁跟住就好，跟住就講社區規劃啊嘅問題啦。不過只係過去可能其實你哋都有做，不過可能分散啲做。但係而家我哋就比較係叫做連埋一齊咁樣。同一時間將軍澳區咁啊幾個區一齊做啊，同一時間其他區一齊做。咁呢個。
Traffic jam ahead on A406 between Great Cambridge Junction, Edmonton, A10 and Colney Hatch Lane. Brian Barnett, B550.
即係大熱傳，可能喺幾個地方，而家就講緊話化整為零，去到幾十個甚至乎上百個社區裏邊咧，咁就係去做呢啲商討嘅處理。
Route recalculation.
話咧，佢都係
Please follow the road for 2.6 miles.
我都去咗唔少嘅社區裏邊啦，咁有啲議員佢哋自己可能有個辦事處，或者可能用緊一個譬如喺個屋村裏邊，佢都有個社區嘅會堂嘅地方啊。咁個議員就其實某程度佢哋管理緊嗰個地方嘅喎。咁跟住我哋有班街坊坐埋一齊，大家嗱而家限聚令之下就唔得啫。咁但係限聚令過咗啦，總有過嘅一天㗎嘛。咁我哋咪坐埋一齊咯。咁你係咪嚟審查啊？咁但係講嘅嘢嗱，我哋唔掂。所有同國安法可能觸碰嘅嘢，我哋就俾咗個基本原則唔掂佢。我哋唔會講香港政制問題，講到爛啦，仲使乜講啊？係咪？我哋唔會講香港嘅地位問題，呢個唔 唔需要講，因為我哋講嘅係個社區。個社區當然你如果唔民主化之下，我哋所有想像未必做到。咁但係喂，而家發夢先啫。咁喺墳墓裏邊，咁雖然啲曱甴周圍飛啫，唔係嗰啲蝙蝠周圍飛啫。咁我哋就都可以繼續喺個瞓喺度喺黑暗當中繼續發夢都得啩，係嘛？因為佢要捉你係佢嗰個政治代價又會更加大，即係國際社會都睇住㗎嘛。你連呢啲嘢都搞，即係咁，即係香港就變咗真係大陸完全大陸化㗎咯喎，係嘛？連呢種喺個小區裏邊嘅居民嘅活動你都喐，你咁仲有自由，真係乜嘢自由都冇晒。
化整為零係會好㗎，即係等同於初選嘅前夕，我同阿細良都擔心，咦？初選能唔能夠成功㗎？如果有5萬人投票好好，但係當有100幾200個嘅票站嘅話咧，真係㗎，黑警係要搞你，係要搗亂，係要阻止，係要阻礙，甚至乎去用國安法要恐嚇嗰啲香港市民去參與，係難咗好多嘛。我相信如果係用區議員即係作為網絡嘅單位，呢個係即係喺技術上邊係容易啲係做到嘅。
因為我仲係
但係嗰個區可以幾即係嗰個 decentralization 係好事，我覺得。但係分到幾細咧？一個選區咁細啊，一話係可以
再細啲啲，可以嗱可以再細啲，亦都可以大啲，好視乎就係嗰個具體嘅即係有冇人去做起嗰個連結網。嗱，譬如我喺區選嘅時候嗰段時間，我都幫手做一啲區一個區議會細選區嘅裏邊一啲協調。咁其實咧裏邊咧已經有啲嘅街坊，即係可能係嗰個屋苑裏邊嘅街坊嘅 WhatsApp 群組，佢哋自己自發走出嚟。嗱，其實你可以如果能夠嗰啲嘅，我相信 Gary 更加清楚啦，即係其實好多屋苑自己本身已經有班朋友有班街坊係組織起上嚟，你就可以由嗰度層面，嗱嗰個佢更加喐你唔到，因為喂我去其中一個街坊嘅屋企裏邊去舉行。你真係撞門入嚟啊，係咪？你唔得啊嘛！我連如果係區議員搞借個公共地方做，佢都仲可以即係揾啲藉口。但係我喺屋企裏邊，我嗰座人啊，我哋嗰幾戶人啊，大家一齊坐埋，我甚至乎講笑啊！如果我哋發展到成個商討嗰個程序咧係詳盡嘅話咧，一班朋友打邊爐。10幾人冇嘢好傾。
喂，咁啊順便幫襯埋黃店咯喎。
係啊，係啊，
係咪先？
係黃店其實都係今日我頭先嚟之前，我就喺火炭區。
票站。
係啊，我就喺火炭區其中一個做票站嘅黃店啫嘛，同個老闆傾完偈。
前一排防疫抗疫，以我所知有好多私人屋苑，特別嗰啲中產後生嗰啲咧，係好快有個群組，就係去協助個屋苑，大家點樣互通消息，去買到口罩啊，買到啲防疫用品嘅咋，係有呢啲咁樣嘅社群嘅。
嗱，我哋而家就係話要建立到一套嘅我就係一路參考緊就係新加坡佢哋。點樣去做嗰個商討程序？咁我就同一啲專業嘅速度員喺度傾緊㗎啦，就係點樣去設計嗰個商討嘅程序。頭先我哋講話情感處理啊，嗰樣嘢咧，其實都係一路咁傾出嚟嘅。咁但係慢慢要比較具體啲寫到出嚟，就係有啲嘢點樣做。可能我哋要培訓一啲人咧，係做一啲嘅速度員，我哋叫 facilitator，佢帶嘅。咁但係咧到咁上下咧，如果有啲區累積嘅經驗咧。可能咧，我哋做到一個懶人包咧，就係有啲，因為其實我哋啲支持者好勁啊嘛，我哋本身可能就已經係一個臨床心理學家嚟嘅，可能係嘛。咁佢自己可能就同一班佢啲街坊坐埋一齊，個臨床心理學家就帶嗰個，佢即係佢個技巧喺晒度，不過你要做啲咩咧？咁我哋提供咗嗰個叫做懶人包俾佢，佢真係可能一班朋友打邊爐去黃店食飯。跟住2個鐘頭、3個鐘頭嗰晚已經可能傾咗好多嘢出嚟。但係點樣能夠將呢啲傾咗嘅嘢整合翻上嚟咧？呢個我諗就需要有一啲嘅資訊科技幫手啦。即係話，如果能夠佢做咗啲嘢，能夠將相關嘅嘢輸入去，透過嗰個資訊科技 將佢入翻落個大系統裏邊。咁我哋又會知道原來喺某區有人傾過啲嘢，而喺某個範疇，譬如佢講緊係醫療嘅，或者可能係講緊社區某啲嘢嘅，佢可能已經有啲嘅諗法擺咗上去啦。咁其他人未開始傾嘅時候，又可以睇下人哋傾嗰啲咩嘢咯。即係用個資訊科技咧，就將所有細嘅點嗱，我哋講緊好，佢好難打我哋，因為我哋分到咁細啊嘛，真係好似曱甴咁樣周圍走啊。咁但係我哋又唔係斷裂開嘅喎，我哋要個方法將佢連結埋一齊。頭先我哋講波蘭嗰個嘅經驗咧，就係 network 先係最關鍵性。你好多嘅細嘅點發生嗰啲嘢，但係如果唔能夠將佢連結埋一齊咧，個力量咧就唔夠大。咁我
會唔會咁睇咧 ，Benny？其實復活嘅過程同復活嘅結果都係咁重要嘅喎。嗱，你頭先講到就係沉寂時期點樣保持個信念，點樣保持個 network，點樣大家維護，情緒上好或者 focus 喺一啲具體工作事務事工上嘅嘢啊等等。咁呢個就係復活嘅過程。當然好多人就會一開始就話：冇用嘅，你哋噏完之後嗰啲嘢都做唔到嘅，又冇權力，佢哋又俾政府抵制咁，當然會有潑冷水啦。但係即係我意思係咪喺你嘅構思裏邊，頭先你所講嘅過程，同樣佢都係一個目的。
你嗱兩種嘅可能，我哋叫做 outcome，就係我哋即係嗰個結果出到嚟。第一個咧就係咧，當有啲人經歷過一個咁樣嘅過程裏邊咧，大家會識得學咗好多技巧嘅嘢嘅，即係嗰啲人嘅質素會有改變嘅。就係佢
自己復活先啦。
係啦，冇錯，佢會肯聽人講嘢啦，佢會嘗試明白人講嘢啦，佢會學識點樣去將自己想要講嘅嘢話俾人知，同埋嘗試說服人啦。即係呢樣嘢，你唔好講呢啲質素咧，好似係理所當然嘅，其實唔係嘅，係要經過一個過程，慢慢培育出嚟嘅。呢個係第一個，我覺得係嗰個 outcome 嗰個結果係重要。第二就係話，我哋傾咗出嚟嘅嘢。即係譬如我話對個社區嘅建設嘅一啲嘅想像，
His party, Forza Italia, says his hospital treatment is merely a precaution. There are reports from the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo that dozens of heavily armed rebels have left Bunia, the capital of Ituri province, following negotiations with the authorities. There was tension in the city earlier when fighters of the Codeco militia headed for the prison, demanding the release of their detained colleagues. Any deal is complicated by the fact that the United Nations accuses the group of widespread human rights abuses. But Barbara Balouch of the UN Refugee Agency said the fighting had driven thousands of Congolese from their homes.
The newly displaced report killings, rape, torture, looting, and burning of the homes in the recent weeks. Dozens of people have arrived with injuries. There are many children, women, and elderly among the newly displaced.
At least 7 women have died in an explosion at a fireworks factory in India. 2 others were seriously injured. The factory owner is among the dead. Local officials said the unit in Tamil Nadu state was licensed to make firecrackers, but they're investigating whether only permitted explosives were stored on site. A senior advisor to Pakistan's Prime Minister has offered to resign after being accused of concealing family assets worth millions of dollars held in companies abroad. Hassan Bajwa, a former army general, has published a detailed rebuttal of the allegations, describing them as baseless. BBC News.
Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Zainab Badawi. The UN General Assembly gets underway this month and it will be one like no other. It will be mostly a virtual summit because of COVID-19. My guest is the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. In a year that the UN marks its 75th anniversary, why does he believe the pandemic is unleashing a tsunami of hate and is also undermining multilateralism? And does he really have the power to do anything about this? Secretary General Antonio Guterres at UN headquarters in New York, welcome to Hard Talk. In May, you said that COVID-19 has unleashed a tsunami of hate, scapegoating and scaremongering. Why do you think it's brought out the worst in humanity?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be back in our talk. I think COVID-19 has demonstrated the enormous fragility of our world. We are on our knees with a microscopic virus. And in my opinion, the main reason is because countries were not able to come together and face COVID-19 in a close coordination. We have seen each country going its own way. The World Health Organization can advise, but they cannot force countries to do anything. And so we see the virus moving from east to west, now from north to south. It can come back with a second wave. And the lack of effective coordination among member states, the fact that we are so divided with the fragility that we have, made this a devastating disease with devastating economic and social impacts. And the only way to fight back is with solidarity and unity.
But that isn't really addressing why you decided to say it had unleashed a tsunami of xenophobia and hate and scaremongering.
We have one enemy, the COVID-19, and either we unite ourselves against this enemy, and either we respect each other, understanding our differences, but come together, or we might be defeated, making this a cycle that could go for 5 to 7 years and a huge depression around the world. We need to avoid it. We are still on time to avoid it. We are still on time to make things relatively under control in the next 2 or 3 years to make sure that we can come to a new normality and take profit also of the COVID-19 to rebuild our economies and societies in a much more sustainable and inclusive way.
So, Antonio Guterres, I mean, I appreciate as a Secretary General of the United Nations, you can't really point the finger very specifically at countries, but when somebody in your position makes a statement such as we've seen examples of populism and xenophobia being stirred up, you must have some specific examples in mind. Are you able to share any of those with us?
It is clear that we have had in the last months several eruptions of, I would say, forms of nationalism that, in my opinion, do not help to solve problems. If we would have the United States and China united instead of criticizing each other, if you would have the capacity of countries of the North to express their solidarity with the South in a much more effective way. In the North, trillions of dollars were mobilized to relaunch the economies, but the developing countries cannot do it, and they have had very little support, both financial support and in-depth relief. So it's time to end this kind of division and nationalism. It's time to come together.
So when you say you're concerned about relations, for instance, between the United States and China, and we've also got a lot of criticism about another world power, Russia, with its actions in Belarus and so on, how worried are you about potential rivalries between the world's centers of power really getting out of hand?
I believe that we should move into a multipolar world with multilateral forms of governance. But instead, what we might have is the two largest economies, the United States and China, shaping two separate worlds, with two separate economies, with different trade rules, with different internets, with different strategies in artificial intelligence, and with different geopolitical and military strategies, and this could be an enormous risk for humankind. Of course, there are enormous differences. Of course, those differences need to be seriously discussed. There are grievances that need to be addressed. We must have a rules-based international system, one only global economy, and one global set of rules that everybody respects. And everybody needs to make an effort to make that happen, but it's absolutely essential to avoid a big disruption, a big rupture that would divide the world and that would not create the conditions for us to be able to address the huge challenges we face. We face the pandemic, we face climate change, we face lawlessness in the cyberspace. We have enormous fragilities, and if we go on in a movement that would tend to divide the world into two, to move into a G2 that would then lead to a G0, we would be doomed.
It's not just a rivalry, is it, Secretary General, about the economy and technology and so on. Zhao Bo, who's a professor at Tsinghua University in China, says the relationship between China and the United States is in free fall. That specific rivalry could be dangerous. So when, for example, we've seen in recent days naval exercises being undertaken by both China and the United States in the South China Sea, a potential flashpoint there, when we see the criticisms that have been made about China over its security laws in Hong Kong, its treatment of the Uyghurs and so on. Are you worried that we could see perhaps some kind of escalation between the United States and China?
I don't expect
a military
confrontation in the short term, but when you have a economic and technological divide that becomes completely so deep that separates the world into two, then the risks in the long term of military and geostrategic confrontation, of course, increase. We need to avoid a new Cold War. I don't think the Cold War was a good thing. We need to avoid a new Cold War. And the fragilities we have and the challenges that we face in common require that we look into the real things that divide us. Of course, we have different political systems, we have different trade systems, we have many things that need to be adjusted, need to be negotiated, but it's absolutely essential to make an effort in order to have a common response of humankind to the common challenges humankind is facing.
So when you talk about the rivalry, there are those who say that in terms of the United States and China, China has already won. Former Singaporean diplomat Kishore Mahbubani, who's now one of Asia's most influential thinkers, told me on Hard Talk last month that COVID-19 is only going to accelerate the shift of power to Asia, which was already happening before. Do you agree with his assessment?
I don't think that nobody is winning. Division doesn't make anybody win. Division makes everybody lose. It is obvious that there has been a progressive change in power relations in the world. It is obvious that there has been a transfer from west to east of economic dynamism. But I do believe we are on time to build a multipolar world with the United States, with China, with the European Union, with India, with several other, Japan, several other key actors. And that multipolar world can create common rules and can have forms of governance that are multilateral, in which the differences that exist can be solved and in which we all can benefit. The idea that we should divide and that based on that division someone would win is, in my opinion, a total disaster and doesn't make any sense.
It may be, in your opinion, a total disaster, Secretary General, but do you think that it's already happened when you look at how the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been touring Western Europe this week? And we all know that China has weathered the global recession much better than other economies in the world, and it's seeing some growth, albeit, of course, not at the levels it had seen in the past. Do you think it's already using its economic clout to win favour?
Please turn left in half a mile, then turn right.
Competition in relation to that. It is clear, in my opinion, that we need to avoid this kind of competition, which is a competition that divides, and we need to find ways in which people compete, but in a common set of rules, in a global economy that is a global economy shared by everybody, and in which different poles can cooperate and compete, but respecting common rules and creating the conditions for global governance to address the global challenges that we face. There is no way to address climate change if we don't come together. If everyone tries to win the battle of climate change alone, it will be a disaster for us all. There is no way we can put order in the cyberspace if we are divided. And we might face the risk of cyber wars in the future.
So let me ask you this then. You've made a very persuasive case there for the need for common rules. So how frustrated do you get when you see major powers really violating those rules? And I'm thinking in particular of one situation that's creating a lot of concern at the moment, and that's Belarus. So you have Alexander Lukashenko, who there was an election on August the 9th, and he was declared the winner, and there were many who said this election was not free or fair. The European Union have said, no, we don't accept that it was. So Russia, his big ally, is supporting him. So how frustrated do you feel when you see countries like that not playing by these rules that you so eloquently defend?
When I see a situation like the Belarus situation, it is clear that there is a deep internal crisis. It's clear that there is a deep internal divide, and it is obvious that you don't solve this kind of crisis by arresting people or by oppressing the demonstrations. Belarus is a case in point where I believe a deep national dialogue needs to be put in place, and my appeal to the president is to understand that need, and my appeal to the opposition is, if the president moves in that direction, to accept that dialogue among Belarusians, independently of others that, of course, are not Belarusians, dialogue among Belarusians to find a way to come out of this crisis with something that unites the country. And as I said, it's not arresting people that the problem will be solved.
So you want
it's time to recognize that there is, in the 21st century, no room for prisoners of conscience.
All right.
Nobody should be arrested based on political opinions.
And you said just there that you want to ensure that this is a dialogue that takes place between forces in Belarus itself. So do you reject the kind of interference that President Vladimir Putin of Russia is undertaking? He told Russian television at the end of last week that President Lukashenko had asked him to set up, and I quote, a certain...
Please turn left in 300 yards onto Suffield Road, then turn right.
Until the situation gets out of control. That's something presumably that you would repudiate.
I don't think this problem will be solved by police measures or by arrests. This problem needs to be solved by dialogue among the Belarusians.
But can you categorically repudiate then that kind of interference that President Putin is signalling?
Many would like to interfere in the situation in Belarus. I don't want any interference in Belarus. I want the Belarusians to solve their problem, and to solve their problem based on dialogue.
All right. If you express those words, which have been expressed by others, don't you think that you need them underpinned by some kind of measure or action? So the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia, have now imposed sanctions on 30 Belarusian officials, including President Lukashenko himself, because they feel that the European Union is kind of dragging its feet a bit. Would you be in favour of some kind of sanctions against leaders in Belarus?
Well, I've always many questions about unilateral sanctions. We believe that sanctions should be decided at UN level, as you know. But what matters here is my deep belief that we need to create the conditions for a democratic solution in Belarus based on dialogue, and any effort in this direction will be welcome. But as I said, it should be the Belarusians themselves to be able to solve their problem.
So when you make this plea for multilateralism, Secretary General,
now turn left.
That you've been warning, has already really taken place. I tell you what the influential US think tank, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, has just said. It's worried that severe political polarization has already been tearing apart many democracies, from India and Poland to Turkey and the United States. And it's posing the question that the virus is exacerbating intolerance. Would you say that's true? And I'd like to ask you how you see that intolerance playing out within the context of the Black Lives Matter debate.
We are witnessing, unfortunately, in the world, I would say, a crisis of the Enlightenment values, a crisis of irrationality, the emergence or the strengthening of populist, xenophobic, nationalistic, racist expressions. And racism is particularly abhorrent. I mean, racism is the denial of humanity. And I must say, I found myself even surprised with the level of intensity racism still has around the world, and even within the United Nations. And I'm trying to launch a very serious internal reflection on how to fight racism within our own organization, because this is something that must be a full priority everywhere. But this question of hatred, this question of discrimination, is something we need to be able to fight. We need to strengthen the democratic values that are based on social cohesion. We need to understand that diversity is a richness, not a threat. But for diversity to be a success, there must be a huge investment in social cohesion to make each community feel that their identity is respected, but at the same time that they belong to society as a whole without discrimination. And this, of course, needs the work of governments, the work of local authorities, the work of civil society, the work of youth. And my hope in this is to see the youth much more cosmopolitan, much more open, much less racist than my own generation. And I hope that the youth drive that we have seen in so many areas, we have seen in so many movements about gender equality, fighting against violence against women, against racism, for climate action. I see in this dynamic of the civil society led by youth the main reason for me to be optimistic in the future, even when I see, unfortunately, our democratic societies being undermined by this irrationality, this denial of the Enlightenment that I've mentioned.
Okay, you've said that you want to see people of different backgrounds feeling at ease wherever they may be living in the world, to paraphrase what you've just said. If you were an African-American male, would you feel at ease in the United States when you look at, say, just one statistic commonly cited? African-Americans form 14% of the population in the United States, and yet they form a third of its prison population. Would you, if you were a black American, feel at ease in American society today?
It is clear that the United States have an history, have a legacy. There was, of course, the weight of slavery and the impact of slavery. Then there was, we all remember the questions of the kind of apartheid and separation and the civil rights struggle, Martin Luther King and everything else. So there is a tremendous legacy that requires a huge investment exactly to allow African Americans to feel that they entirely belong.
But when you see what's going on today, the protests.
I have to recognize that the United States has made a big effort in affirmative action in relation to this. But the problem is not only in the United States. Even my own society, Portugal, that had a colonial past, and in which we have an Afro-Portuguese community, sometimes
it's everywhere. But the focus is very much, isn't it, Secretary, on the United States?
That there is a possibility for everybody to live together and to feel that they belong to the society and that they are respected in their values and in their identity.
Sure, but I have to just ask you particularly about the United States. That's where you're based. You've seen all the protests because of George Floyd's killing, and also now because of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin, and the kind of anger it's unleashed on the streets. So it's not peculiar to the United States, but do you think America has a race problem?
All countries have, and of course the US also has. It's a vibrant democracy, but with a very dramatic legacy.
Okay.
Please turn right in 20 yards.
Which of course creates the difficulties that we all recognize, and that is why the investment in social cohesion, the investment in addressing discrimination and
you've made that point.
So important.
Okay, you made that point very quickly. You said there's even racism in the United Nations. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the United Nations we have people from all over the world, and sometimes we see in the way people work, in the way people relate, racist attitudes. racist forms of discrimination, in where, for instance, they make proposals for promotions or things of this sort. And we need to recognize that this exists, and we need to take the measures necessary to overcome this problem and to make sure that the United Nations in itself becomes an example of respect, mutual respect, of all different ethnic and religious groups.
So do you know of specific cases then, Secretary General, of somebody being passed over for promotion at the United Nations because of their colour?
We have had many people complaining. We have had work done by our different bodies, Ethics Office, Office of Investigation. There are problems that need to be addressed. There are complaints that need to be addressed. And we need to be able to recognize that the problem exists to be able to solve it.
All right.
The problem is in relation to racism. Is many people does not recognize that racism exists.
All right.
Many people are in state of denial, and that is why it's sometimes so difficult to fight it effectively.
All right. Your underlying theme constantly is multilateralism, play by the rules and so on. But when you look at the United States retreating from multilateralism, and we're seeing, you know, the use of the veto by the superpowers on the permanent members of the UN Security Council wielding their veto, and embargoes against Libya, for example, being ignored and so on, and deals like the one between the United Arab Emirates and Israel being struck really with the United States simply as a power broker, not including multilateral efforts. You're just really arguing for something which doesn't exist and it's really dead, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's dead. It's alive in many things. If you look at the multilateral humanitarian aid in the world, it's a remarkable success, and I believe the UN is in the very center of it. On the other hand, if one looks at what peacekeepers do in so many parts of the world and how many lives have been saved, if one sees how it has been possible to use the UN as a platform to discuss, for instance, in recent times, the questions of digital cooperation, how we see that in the end, the UN is the platform where everybody can come together, not only governments, but the business community, civil society, cities. I believe multilateralism is not dead.
So when you say we need it, here's the United Nations celebrating its 75th anniversary. That will be the underlying theme of the General Assembly when it meets. But when you look at the way countries have reacted to getting a vaccine, you have warned against vaccine nationalism. You say either we will be free of COVID-19 or nobody will be free. But every country trying to get its own vaccine for its own people. You must despair about your efforts to build multilateralism.
Do not despair, but I am worried and sometimes angry.
Now turn half right.
We launched an initiative with the World Health Organization, with Gavi, with a number of other institutions, the World Bank, named COVAX, and that initiative is still there and aiming at the creation of a vaccine that could be a global public good, that could be indeed a people's vaccine, and I believe that we need it, the world needs it.
Please turn left in half a mile, then turn sharp right.
Many countries are trying to guarantee their own vaccines without understanding that nobody will be safe unless everybody will be safe. My strong appeal is against vaccine nationalism. My strong appeal, understanding that countries need to take the precautions in relation to their own population, but that this needs to be done in a way that allows them to share whatever is needed for the developing world to have the same access to vaccines that the developed countries will be able to eventually provide to themselves. But let's also be clear, we don't even know when the vaccine will exist. We don't even know how effective it will be. And one reason more to understand that without much more solidarity at global level, COVID-19 will not be defeated.
Just very quickly, WHO emergencies expert Mike Ryan says it's important to put this on the table. The virus may become just another endemic virus in our communities, and the virus may never go away. Briefly, do you think we're just going to have to learn to live with COVID-19?
Please turn left in 300 yards onto A503, then turn sharp right.
But this is one reason more for us to move from each one going its own way. One reason more to understand that we can only eradicate it if we act in a coordinated way.
Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, at your headquarters in New York, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
This is the BBC World Service, exploring the
Now turn left.
in India.
Indians love their motorbikes. I didn't realize how many people would pitch up. It was called a ride to say hello. 200, 300 people pitched up.
For many of us, it's in our blood.
Growing up, my dad loved motorcycles, and because we lived so close to Goa, 200 kilometers away, so every time he wanted to visit his sister, we would ride down to Goa instead of drive down.
It brings people together from very different walks of life.
These are the people who would be very aggressive towards each other, but you get them on a motorcycle ride. They, in one sense, break bread. And there is communion. I'm Sunny.
And I'm Shandy.
Join us.
Now turn sharp right.
Why India is mad for motorbikes. Tuesday at 8:14 GMT.
Hello, I'm Manny Jasny, and coming up on World Football, we'll hear from former Premier League player Matt Piper, whose life nosedived after he was forced to retire through injury at the age of 24. His lowest point came when he nearly killed himself, but he'll be telling us how he's turned his life around. And we'll hear from the second worst team in international football as they try again to find a competitive win for the first time. Join Pat Nevin, Heather O'Reilly and me after the BBC News.
BBC News with Eileen McHugh. The United Nations nuclear watchdog has warned that Iran is in breach of the limits set on uranium enrichment and other provisions of its international nuclear agreement.
Please follow the road for 1.6 miles.
Iran's enriched uranium now stands at more than 10 times the limits set down in the 2015 deal. People in Lebanon have observed minutes of silence a month after a massive explosion killed almost 200 people in the capital Beirut.